Okay. Call this meeting to order of the Kent Board of Selectmen at 4:30 p.m. on August 10th, 2018. And we'll remind everybody here and watching from outside that this is a special meeting because the regularly scheduled monthly meeting was postponed due to unavailability. Meaning that we have a rather limited agenda of 4 items, and those are the only items that we can discuss at this meeting. There is no other, there are no other things on this agenda such as selectmen's report or public comment of any of that sort. So there are 4 items on the agenda, and that is what we are limited to today. So we can start. Will everybody please stand and join us to salute the flag. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. The first item on the agenda, it is a great pleasure to take some time out of our meeting to recognize some folks. It's too bad that more of them couldn't be here, but they were here for the important part, which John will tell us about in a minute. But before I turn it over to John for an explanation of what this is all about, I'd just like to publicly thank John Grant and Susie Rundle as our Emergency Management Director and Deputy Emergency Management Director, who have done a fantastic job since taking over this position roughly a year ago or less, and immediately learned how to do their job and did it very, very well under some trying circumstances. So I just want to extend my public thank yous and keep up the good work, and anything that we can do to make your job easier, let us know.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So John, could you tell us
Sure.
why we're
Am I in the camera?
here today?
Can you get a shot?
A camera on.
Not really, I'm bashful. So basically, I'm the deputy for Kent's Office of Emergency Management, and also a Red Crosser. And I am am I on there?
No.
No? Hang on, how about now?
If you sat in that chair right there, you'd be in there.
So, you got a spotlight for it? Yeah, you got it?
Say your good side.
All right, so anyway, I'm the deputy for Office of Emergency Management for Kent, and also Red Crosser, and I am trained in all types of disasters. And when we had our disaster here in town, we had a lot of people call up and ask if they could help out. So we kept that list, and after everything was over, we didn't have anything to do at that time for these people, but after everything was over, we decided, Susie and I decided that one of the needs that we had was sheltering, and it's a basic need for all people. And so we did that, and I invited the Red Cross over to do the class, which they did, and we taught them all the basic essentials that were needed for sheltering in a disaster. Food, water, sheltering, and be just a comfort to people that are in need. So after that, they all loved it, everybody loved the course, and so we're ready for action. Hopefully.
No, we're not.
So what I'd like to do right now is I'd like to turn this over to Susie and Bruce, and they can hand out the certificates.
Okay.
So this course was a one-day course?
One-day course.
1 day course, yeah.
6 hours, was it?
It seemed like
Yeah, 6 hours.
And just to give a little background, the only other time, to the best of my knowledge, that we've had to open a shelter was in that October snowstorm of,
Right.
what year, Rick?
2010.
2010, because Rick was in Key West. That's how we mark our disasters here in Kent when Rick's on vacation. We opened a shelter, and I have to say, volunteers, and I know Darlene was one of them, and maybe some others of you were too, really stepped up to the plate and did a fantastic job. But now we've got a program in place, thanks to John, where we know exactly who to call upon, and they know what to do once they get there, and we're in a much better place than we were, even though it worked, and worked well back then. This will work even better. So, Susie, who do we have?
Darlene Brady.
Thank you, Darlene. Seriously, thank you very, very much.
Not in the camera. Charlotte Lindsay.
the others, Susan, just so we can?
John, you have a list? Catherine Backrack, Sue Bierman, Teresa Duncan, Fran Kutzel, Karen Iannucci, Diane and,
Plus no.
you said it, okay? Jim Lovell,
Lovely.
and Matthew Winter.
Congratulations, those people.
Thank you to all of you, I know you're watching out there, and get
Yes.
Captain Backrack's certificate redone.
I know, I saw that, yeah, there was two mistakes, yeah.
There you go.
I didn't do these.
No. Thank you very much, everybody. Much appreciated. Okay, the second one on the agenda is 2 or 3 months ago, we talked about, and Jeff, thank you, produced a new form for grant requests coming up in our budget. And I think it's a great idea to really formalize the process and give us information that we can compare one year to the other and really have a better idea, more than just the 5 that we meet face to face with. We'll have a clear idea of what our money is going toward.
So the form I just passed out is slightly revised. It includes some consideration of something Barbara had put out in the past. But it's essentially what we had talked about before. There were comments from some people in town hall. Try to accommodate, you can't accommodate everybody. This is a never-ending process, but I think it puts together the essence of it. So I would suggest that this be considered our standard form, subject to amendment as we decide we need more or less information, and that this be incorporated into the policy manual as a provision for request for financial grant.
So this would be, is that a motion? Second and discuss?
Should we do it as a motion? That's my motion to adopt this as our policy in the policy manual.
I will second that motion, and so now we're into discussion. So, just correct me if I'm wrong, this is what we will send to each group, or mostly groups, that are in our budget, requesting assistance from the town, like the fire department, or Susan B. Anthony, or the library, whatever. Everybody will get one of these.
And we expect them to all comply. I mean, obviously, we'll deal with the situation as it comes up. In my view, it's it's up to us as a board. But it seems to me we should be getting some reliable information that we can discuss, rather than once a year we get requests for a lump of money and we kind of sit here during crunch time, of course, and we don't have a lot of time to analyze it. Timing is an issue, or I should say a question. I put January 15th. There was some discussion about whether it should be earlier or later. I don't know what the right date is. I would suggest that we go ahead and implement this as of now, but we can change the date if we determine there is a better date as a kind of a target for people. But we have to have a cutoff.
So if we want to adopt that date, which I'm fine with, we have to make sure that we get these out in a timely manner to them, giving them plenty of time to gather this.
Right, I mean, I
It'll
would
be
say
easier for some than others to gather this information.
I would say in the fall. I mean, give them 90 days.
Yeah.
And I think it's on the website, maybe on the treasurer's website, about a general notification if you are going to apply for a grant. That there's some timing, and this will be the form that she will send out,
Okay.
or your office will send out.
A couple of questions. One is, again, tied into timing. I lost my thought on that. Let me go to my next point, which is when we get a grant from the state of Connecticut on a road, I'm making it up, or the bathrooms, do we have to specify what we spend each of those dollar amounts on? So as an example, X amount goes to tar, X amount goes to engineering, and then provide that to the state as a grant?
Yeah, well, I'll use the Welcome Center since that's the most recent experience. The short answer is yes.
Okay.
We're still sitting on, as an example, a small sum of money
You said that a few times.
I have said that a few times, wanting to spend it rather than give it back, and they want us to spend it and give it back anyway.
Where I'm
Yeah.
going is, that's what I thought was the case. And I thought that that might be an appropriate step for this board to take with respect to the actual recipients. Meaning, like, is this going to be, and this sort of ties into my first thought that I forgot, is this going to be just supplemental income as a grant, or is this specifically designed to make sure things operate?
Would that come into briefly describe purpose of grant?
It would start with the purpose of grant, but I would think it might be appropriate, as that money is spent over the year, that we're notified as to how it's spent. As an example, with the library, if we give them the grant, I think it's $75,000, roughly.
More than that, it's
80.
over 100.
Okay, so $100,000. What is that enhancing and helping? Because I think the short answer to the taxpayer is, how much more are we going to do this, and how long, and for what purpose? And I think it's the same thing when you look at it as a road or a bathroom. The end goal was to build a building or to make a road, but here are the elements that go into it. So I think that would be a step that might be appropriate, if that's how grants work.
How about adding another piece to this, saying something like, if receiving this grant, if you received this grant last year, please explain what our money was used for. Not worded that quite that way, but we gave you this last year, what did you use it for last year?
Well, I mean, I think that's going to put the onus on a bookkeeper who's going to say, well, I don't know, let me get the information. I think it might be appropriate, and I don't know, I throw it out as a discussion point as to, on two levels. One, it's a process that grants traditionally take, as in the case that we've received from the state. And two, it will help us gain perspective on lots of things. One, how they're using it, and two, where their holes may be in the future. So I don't know the process in which you used to respond to the state with respect to the bathrooms.
Periodic reports to the state through the treasurer's office.
And you had to show where the checks went, is that how you do it?
We can, so if we, for example, if we put in we don't get the money up front, so if we put in, we need $50,000 of our grant money, we have to give reasons that we, or I'm sorry, we've spent $50,000 to put in a shower. Here we bought this shower head, this
Gotcha.
door, this. It comes out to $51,000 we're asking at this grant for reimbursement for that. So they know exactly what we spent our money on, their money.
Because they're allotting it.
They allot it to us.
And how do we do it now? Do we just
do
have
it
the treasurer cut a check for
on
X
July
amount?
2nd, any of the people who receive grants from the town can send a letter in requesting their money.
The
The fire
whole
department, for example, does it in 2 parts.
Okay.
And they request it in writing, and the check is cut to them. That's been the process forever.
Yeah, I know where you're going with this, but,
Yes, you do.
doesn't that put some onus on us to come up with a system for reviewing the expenditures?
That's the whole thing. And quite honestly, understanding how their budgets work. And there are 2 big grants that we have, and then there are others that are smaller, so I would not have a problem if indeed we have a limit whereby we understand where those are going. Specifically, I think it was I'll call it the Children's Center for lack of a
The
better.
5 big ones that we visit with every year,
Mhm.
the library, the fire department, the children's center, I always forget one, now I'm forgetting 2, that are above 10,000 or more.
Mhm.
And if you remember, Ken Nursing Association, they dropped out. Cemeteries are 36,000, yeah.
Well, that's where I was going, is they dropped out and said,
We don't
need it because we sent.
money.
And I think there's an obligation on our end to make, hopefully getting to that point where we're not increasing help aid, but we're actually either decreasing it or maybe strategizing as to how to use it more wisely. sense?
I understand what you're saying, and to a great degree I agree with it, but I'm wondering whether we're telling them how to do business.
It's our money.
It is our money, true.
And we should tell them how we do our business, I think. I mean, I don't think it's not like a ruler, it's more of just an understanding. It is our job, I believe, and having been on the Board of Finance, also believe firmly, it is our job to watch and protect and to understand where our tax dollars go. And it's less clear on the Board of Selectmen than it is on the Board of Finance. And I think that's just something that, it's not that hard to do, I don't think, and that's how grants work. I don't know the process in which we would do it, but I can't see it being a very onerous one. But if X amount goes to...
Well, what I had in my original form was a box to describe in detail the need for the grant. And maybe we could add that in, and intended use of funds, so that we know specifically what they're using them for, and ask for a commitment that they provide an annual report on use of funds.
And would, doing something like that, would, it was placed in operating expenses suffice, or would we want something more detailed than that?
More detailed, you mean specific?
What kind of operating expense is that?
Well, intended use of funds, I think, is probably sufficient. I don't think we want to get, even taking Chris's point to the extreme, I don't think we want to get too granular.
Well, but there is a way to be granular without being granular, and that is to fund the grant in the manner in which a grant, at least as described by Bruce with the bathrooms, is funded. So a request comes in 2 times a year from, I'm picking on the fire department, if you will, as opposed to maybe the library 1 time a year. But if the library is going to come to us and they want their $100,000, it would be good to know for them to come and request, I'm making it up, $2,000 or $10,000 for X. It comes to this board that we say, yep, that sounds great, $2,000 for X, because we've had it already presented to us and we know the process is there. The money's there if they need it in $30,000, and we understand where it's coming from, because it's then out in the public as to where and how that's happened.
Rick, comment?
I thought you already had something in place like that, but I asked Barbara, and said normally on ones over, I think she thought it was 20,000, you've been requesting where the money's been spent and everything, so. You know,
I sure don't recall ever reviewing that.
We meet personally with any over 10, but
And that's, you're getting data from them when you do that, right, where they're spending the money?
Yeah,
The
but it's not tracked in any way.
But I don't recall ever seeing a document saying this is the way your $20,000 support.
And furthermore, whatever documentation we've received, in my time here, we've never gone back and verified that that's been the way the funds were used. So it hasn't been tracked at all, really. When we accept the request for grant, it's, you know, here's your money.
Which I think has, been a tradition that's worked, but now we've got bigger numbers, or we're moving to bigger numbers. The fire department came, I'm specifically reacting to the fire department when they came to us with a budget, non-budget. They had a budget that an executive meeting, I guess, had somewhat done, but was not passed by the floor or something. I may be getting my details wrong. And I'm not trying to castigate them, I'm just simply using it as an example where it put us, as you said, under pressure at a time of budget to sit there and say, well, geez, you guys need money, how do we do this? So all I think is if we have a process, and I would advocate, while January is a great time, I would advocate even earlier, to really understand where these people are, what their budgets are, what their needs are, what their future needs are, and then the appeal to the town can happen. Because ultimately, although we're the gatekeepers, ultimately it's the town that really wants to make the decision.
As a taxpayer, I'm 100% with Chris's intentions, what your thoughts are. but also as a committee person, somebody that receives an allotment from the town for a budget. It keeps us within our boundaries. We pay attention as what we're supposed to be doing. We don't go to extremes to buy ink and paper and all that. We come up here to see if it can go through Joyce's hands and it's done. We're encouraged to watch our pennies. Not that we can't have anything. We obviously, given when I came to you with my numbers, it was $1,200 more because we knew what we needed, and we're getting that.
But that's better budgeting.
Absolutely.
That is much better budgeting when you
Absolutely.
look and you say, well, geez, we can't eke out anymore, we need more money.
Right.
Yeah, and I think, and I say this multiple times at budget time, the department heads have done a real fine job of that. We're talking specifically grants.
Specifically grants,
Yeah.
it's not about departments and things like that, but it's about the grants. And I just think we need a process in which everybody understands where that grant money is going and how it's being spent.
Well, I agree, it's just a matter of defining and deciding on how to implement it.
I think something within that form could be a start.
Maybe we can make a statement that we expect some regular reporting on the use of funds. Care to take a stab at it?
Well, you can do it that way, or you can do it the way that I'm leaning towards, which is the request, I'm making it up, the library needs $15,000 of their $100,000 in July 2nd. That comes in as just a simple request to the first selectman, and then it hits the treasurer, and that money is then released because that's already been okay and approved by this board and by the town. And then it's a paper trail that this $15,000 was requested, and it was an expenditure, and they put in what it's for.
Okay, but I mean, we're not gonna go to the library in this case and verify that that's what the expenses were for. I mean, if they have a general operating budget and they need some new computers, for example, we're not gonna go look at their paperwork to verify this money was used for that.
Well, we could, is my point.
We could.
You don't have to, but if somebody said, what the heck did they spend it on? And then you could go back and say, well, this was a computer. You could go and turn to the people at the board and they could say, was this for the computer? Yes, here it is. That's the process I'm talking about. It's not, it's an assumptive positive, not an assumptive negative.
Okay, but at this point in our process, I think we have to put some time into defining that process, which is more involved than not just requesting a grant.
Is it? You think?
Yeah, the process right now is they request their money, we approve it, and they request their money.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're asking them to request it as needed for specific
needed,
items,
yeah,
for
not just
specific
because it's-
items that are definable items.
Well, wouldn't it be good at the end of the year, based on Susie's sort of layout, that I'm making it up, 1,200 is requested and 1,100 is used?
I'd like to interject, and Barbara's not here, but Barbara did send us a letter that Barbara sends out stating as a third step of it, after the July 1st, sometime after July 1st, that the organization's to send a letter to the treasurer requesting release of the approved budgeted funds for your organization. In the absence of this formal letter of request, approved funds will not be released.
Right.
So she already sends that as far as, so this step, 1, 2, 3 could be a cover letter to that form. And if you wanted to then add in, when you're sending that letter of request, please identify what those funds are to be used for. But it's
That would be a good time to do it because that already exists.
correct.
Yeah.
So it's already, I think it's somewhat
It's halfway
already,
there, or
it's in
somewhat
place.
there.
It
Yep.
is in place.
Yeah.
So.
And I don't know if we necessarily have to define it here. I think what we have to just point out is that we have a process, and we can explain it to them, that is different than in the past, and you don't have to sign on the dotted line, it's just sort of that's, I mean, we could decide to change that process at some point, and this would still suffice. Do you see what I mean?
Okay.
So I think this is great because it gets them identified. What I would like to see is just a more defined and understood paper trail, if you will.
So do you agree with Darlene just suggested as a possibility of including that, incorporating that into the treasurer's?
Yes, but what I don't want to see is we request our $50,000 and we're doing it for general operating, because that is not a paper trail, that's just doing the same thing under a different guise. Because general operating, what we want to know is, I think, and not everybody, but what I think, what I'd like to know is what component is this town taking, what stake is this town taking in the operation of your budget? And if it's just under the discretion of a board, I don't know if that's advisable.
Okay, under your plan of action, when funds are now requested, library comes in asking for $15,000 for the computer. The request goes to Barbara initially. Then what happens? Does she come to us to verify that we agree that that's part of the
No,
process?
it's already agreed.
Well, the details aren't agreed.
Once the new fiscal year begins, July 1st, shortly thereafter, we start receiving some letters requesting their, I got one the other day for a very small amount, I forget what the organization was, a lady wondering if we were included in the budget again this year. I said, yes, you were, here's the amount that it was, how do I get it? You send a letter to the
Okay, so in that scenario, where is the check and balance kind of check that the money she's requesting is for a scope of work that we'd authorized?
That would be Bruce. He gets the letter, he knows that the town has approved and we have approved whatever that request was.
Whatever that request was, support. Now, nowhere in that particular one, it was like $1,500. Nowhere did we support in any kind of discussion or meeting what that $1,500 is going to go towards. So there's no, as you said, check or balance in that respect.
But that said, with a request process like this, it'll come back to us next year and say, well, this is what you spent it on, this seems like it's in line with what the taxpayer said. If we see things that request for things that might not have been within the scope of what we thought was going to happen, that will force our hand to say, let's look a little deeper on
But I
it.
think Jeff's form, as it exists,
Yeah.
and he's adding to it now, but I think as it exists, is a good start for next budgetary.
Yeah, I see Jeff's form as a great way of introducing ourselves to the grants. What I'm talking about is the flip side, when we're actually, when the grants have been approved, so that, like anything, then next year you look at that to look at that, and look at that to look at that. And I think that's where I see the steps working in our favor.
Would it be appropriate to have some language that we expect in end of the year report on detailed use of funds?
Well, that would be an obligation that we would get from Barbara, I would think. But we get it, we could, so as an example, well, here, she can run a report, let's say, on the grants to the Children's Center. At which point there were 3 checks that were allotted. What's the grant there? 30?
No, it's not that.
Small,
It's,
15?
15, I believe.
Okay, so there were 3 checks of $5,000 that went out. One in July, one in January, and one in March. And they could tag with specific what they used those for. At which point, when that report is given to us, which is just 3 checks on a QuickBooks spreadsheet, it just says this is what it was for, and it made sense to us.
Okay.
That's all I'm saying.
Right now, that information doesn't exist. Right now, my guess is that their request comes in one letter.
Yeah.
We would like our $15,000.
I get it. I believe that to be true, yes.
Well, I'm sure
As a-
that's true
yeah.
with almost all of them, except for the real big ones. They're doing segments.
Kind of sounds to me that if we add language specifically requesting intended use of funds, that it's some documentation that we can, that I
That's
guess
a
you
beginning.
will look at
That's
when
a
they,
beginning.
what they're requesting, if they're requesting it for repainting the building, but they hadn't anticipated that when they made their initial request, then that's not an acceptable use of funds. So the only filter is gonna be you when the request comes in for a disbursement. I mean, we may need to kind of expand our process with a little more,
But do we want
detailed
to
work,
do
but
that using this, or do we want to do it as Darlene suggested, as a little bit of an addition to the treasurer's letter that goes out telling them how to obtain their grant funds?
yeah, we kind of have two groups working with this. Her letter kind of looks like the starting point if you approach the town and said, I would like a grant. But it really should be coming through the selectmen as an initial point of contact.
No, her letter is people who've already been granted a grant in the budget, and here's what you have to do to get it from us, correct?
Well, it doesn't say that, it says requesting funding.
No.
Submit a request to the Board of Selectmen in January, and it'll go on the list for consideration. So this is her current policy, right, Darlene?
Yes, that's what she said.
If a group wants money, they can come and start that way, yeah.
Okay, so.
Or they can come and talk to you, and that's the same
No, that's
concept.
okay.
This is more, Barbara's process is more of the mechanics of how it's gonna work in her office. But ultimately, it has to come to the selectmen, and this is our form for us to review it and determine if it's a worthy cause.
I look at it as I don't see why they can't go hand in hand.
I agree.
I think that they incorporate the form that now the Board of Selectmen is gonna utilize for the grant process, but it also helps streamline. I mean, Barbara's very clear in her steps of, this is how the process goes, 1, 2, 3, and
Well, actually,
Yep.
this
just
can
like
be
that.
sent to them.
that's what I'm saying.
Just like that.
Just like that, just utilize this as a cover letter, again, how you wanna
Or ask
signature
ask
it.
Barbara to include Jeff's form with her
There you
name.
go. Yeah, and I think the only difference is what I understand is that Barbara may not send it to everyone. She sends it to potentially maybe new individuals or those who may have skipped you. I'm not sure that it goes out to everyone. I think what your intention is, everyone will get this every single year. So that may be a change of process, but I think that the intent of the letter is very clear, and it just might be changing a little bit of the wording to be more specific to identifying the use of the funds.
But if the traditional groups that come in for funding, grant funding, annually we just send them, we don't even send them anything, we just say, come on in with your request.
I contact those who are over $10,000 and make an appointment with them for them to come in and sit down here at the table with us.
So might the process be that they actually come to us rather than you go to them?
Could be, if you want the money bad enough, you come to us.
I mean, if you want a grant, you've got to come to us and ask for it.
Groveling, of course.
No, it's not groveling, it's the
I
process.
don't mind contacting.
Well, I mean, I think we're working to formalize the process a little bit,
Yep.
and I think that's a good idea. We've kind of been a little bit fast and loose in the past, trying to use good judgment, but still.
Yep.
And I think this will formalize it, so.
And that's why I think sending Barbara's letter and your form to all of them.
To everyone that we know is gonna be requesting, or suspect is gonna be requesting a grant, or has previously had
As
a grant,
previously.
send the form, and anyone who contacts the town in the future, a new entrant, gets sent the form as well.
Correct.
And then it's up to us to be policemen for compliance with the form. If somebody comes in with an untimely request, we can decide if we want to consider it. Yes.
You're only talking about considering whether to do a grant itself or the money within the grant now.
What do you mean? Once the grant request comes in, then it's considered in
So,
detail.
like Chris is talking about, you're gonna be saying, well, maybe that money shouldn't have been spent for that, but unless you specify when the grant is done, what's allowable to spend it on and all that stuff. Like the state has pages and pages of stuff that you can read to find out what you're eligible for spending on it.
Well,
If you
it's a
don't tell
question of
somebody
how
ahead of time
granular
what
we
they-
want to get, and I don't think we should get too granular, but if we specify a request for intended use of funds, you know, we'll know if it's for computers or painting the building, that sort of differentiation.
And I think the connection, if I may, is when they come in front of us, they should have an idea as to what they're going to spend their money on. Like the Children's Center, we're gonna spend it on $5,000 on toys, $5,000 on field trips, and $5,000 on outdoor playground equipment. Let's just make that up. At which point, they're gonna tell us that when they come to us and ask for the grant. At which point, we're gonna take it, okay, that sounds great, face value, wonderful. Then they're gonna request a $5,000 and it's gonna be for playground equipment. We're gonna know that that matches up with what they requested. That simple.
I just have watched this process for so long. So the library is asking you for a third of their budget,
Mhm,
a third.
mhm.
How are they gonna detail a third of their budget for you?
Shouldn't they?
I mean, I just don't understand how it's gonna work. Same with
I
the fire
don't
department.
either, but
The fire department is gonna say, but we put all the money in together and then we just make it work,
Right, that's exactly.
you know? I mean,
But isn't the ultimate question, you make it work, but how does the taxpayer know that they're getting, I mean, I'm
but
gonna
don't
make it up.
they, if you give, what is the fire department's now, like 87?
87, I think.
So you give them 87,000, the next year you see that they spent $287,000.
Mhm.
So you know the year 87 was part of that 287,000.
Yeah.
They don't have any other sources of income, so it's like it's the donations and it's the town.
So what justifies that concept or that logic, if indeed the next year, or as the case was this year, is we need more money? Is it beholden for the taxpayers to just say, sure?
Well,
Or is it a process in which we say, how is your money spent?
yeah, but why aren't you having that conversation when you sit down with them?
We will be.
And part of the problem that you have with both the library and the fire department is they're running on a calendar year and you guys are running on a different fiscal year.
Mhm,
So their year ends December 31st for both of them.
mhm.
And the fire department has a really hard time turning around that information for you guys. And that's why they're always late.
And that's
So-
why maybe planning ahead of time is what we have to do.
I know. It would make more sense to me if you guys were sitting down with the fire department and the library in September
Thank
and
you.
talking about this.
I agree
And
wholeheartedly.
instead of saying, requesting, you know, how are you spending our $100,000 and we're going to release the funds to you in chunks as you tell us how you're spending the money, wouldn't it make more sense to just say, how did you spend the $100,000 last year? Give us the details of how this $100,000 was spent.
Well, that is the path, and we did ask that specifically the fire department, and they gave us a breakdown, certainly, but I don't know if it was necessarily the most accurate and conclusive. It wasn't.
But hasn't the fire department also neglected to give you the $990?
This year, yes.
So,
So Jeff's form is what sets that tone. I agree with you wholeheartedly that I believe we should do it earlier, specifically with the groups that have, that we are supporting significantly in their operating, but it would be good to know what that operating is. And more importantly, or moreover, is if that is something that they are struggling with, as in the case you just discussed, this town has to be prepared to possibly support more. And if so, we can walk into it knowing that we've done our due diligence to see what they want, and everything's wide open. That would be my preference. The Children's Center comes to us and they, like, each year, they're like, well, I don't know if we're gonna make it this year, but we need your 15 grand. And, you know, we say, fine, but what is that supporting? Is it, and actually in their case, they came with their 1099, they came with all their information that their accountant produced. And they said basically most of it's going to salaries for teachers. But at least the taxpayer knows that. I can't tell you whether the fire department's spending it on hoses, on fares, on equipment, on, you know, I just don't know.
To some degree, I agree with you, but to some degree, I don't, in that I think that could be difficult information for somebody like the fire department to provide. I mean, I'm just sitting here while you're talking, thinking about my own personal budget. I have funds that come in from my salary here, from the Connecticut teacher pension, from Social Security, I couldn't tell you where, like, if the federal government contacted me and said, what have you spent your Social Security money on? That's sort of what you're asking, isn't it?
Well, two things. One, I could. Two,
What specifically you spent that item on in your budget?
pretty close. But I'm a spreadsheet freak.
Could you?
No.
I mean, that's what, that's
yeah,
where
yeah,
we're going.
It's not that. I'm not asking them whether they spent on 3 uniforms or 4 books. I don't really care about that. What I want to know is that they spent it on books and they spent it on uniforms, generally speaking. And if that's what it's
Well,
about.
if they said uniforms, then, I mean, are we gonna go so far as to say how many uniforms? Did you shop around for better uniforms? Did you get a
No,
good deal?
no, I don't. That's not our job. Our
No,
job,
I know it's not.
our job is to make sure that, let me get back to the premise. I don't care if it's hard for them to do. It's their job if we, the taxpayer, are giving them money. And I believe it's this board's responsibility to make sure that that money's being spent right. And not only right, but just that we know where it went. I think if the onus is on the grantee, then it is. But I don't, and I think it's worth trying, rather than saying, well, we can't do it because it's too hard, and then.
I'm not saying that, I'm saying I love the concept, and I love Jeff's work that he's done on that form. And I'm all for going forward with that, but taking it forward as you have proposed during today's discussion, I think, may have some merit, but I think we should start with the form accompanying Barbara's letter. But I don't think we'll ever get to a point where we're going to get the ones that are receiving large sums of money. I mean, I'm sure the Susan B. Anthony project, who gets $1,500, could probably tell us exactly where our $1,500 went to. But I'm not so sure we can get that. We can realistically expect that kind of specific information specifically from the library and the fire department to get the largest grants.
Well, I think it would be good to ask. I never try to assume that somebody can't do something. I think it also would help us in Susie's example for future budgeting.
I would absolutely
Because
ask.
you know, I know, and you know that the fire department at least is coming back for more funds, higher funds than $87,000. We had the good fortune of being able to have some additional funds from the outside with private donations, and that's great, but that we can't count on forever. And so I think it's really, I don't see this, again, this is not a means of micromanaging any of these groups. I think it's really just an idea to.
If we go forward and specify that we ask for the intended use of funds,
Mhm.
do we need to go much further than that right now? How we implement the knowledge that we get from them?
I would
If the
say
fire-
right now, no, in my opinion.
I would agree.
So
Right
if the
now,
fire
no.
department comes in and says, want to buy lots of good stuff, that's unacceptable.
Well, if it's good stuff that saves people, it's
Well,
acceptable.
let's find out what the good stuff is, and I think they can kind of list that, and if
You
from
know,
their budget.
turnout gear is wearing out and
Yeah, but they're not gonna show us invoices for that, but if they can say, look, a lot of our gear is expiring next year, needs to be replaced, so that's where we think we need to spend this money. We don't have to track that they wrote a check for that,
Correct.
but that's information that they need. So I think at this point, as far as we can go, is specify your intended use of funds, and then we can recalibrate that as we go through the process. And at least it's a framework to look at them in a little more detail.
I think it's great.
And I think that's, to some extent, in your form already, where it says briefly describe purpose of.
Yeah, I think we should go farther. And
Maybe it could be a little more specific.
well, yeah, before I had a large section describing in detail the need for the grant, and I backed off that. Well, I'm gonna go back to it and include, specify intended use of funds. And we'll see what kind of information we get, see if we need to take a harder line on the whole process, or if that's good enough.
Yeah. I would advocate, however, for changing to January and making it much earlier in the process, like soon. Specifically with the library, and specifically with the fire department, because they're the largest ones.
By making what soon?
Making the grant application
Getting it
process
out to them
coming
soon.
to us,
Yeah.
as Lynn suggested. You know, you do that in September, they're already almost done, they're in the last quarter coming in the last quarter of their budgetary cycle. They know what their shortfalls are gonna be, gonna know where their expenditures are gonna be, And that would just be good information for us and good information for them when they make their request for the next budget.
Well, how about this, in terms of, first of all, we need a deadline for, whoever is applying for a grant has to have it in by this date, subject only to us granting an exception. But we can put in the policy that this form will be sent out by a certain much earlier date, possibly September,
Okay.
maybe October, I don't know what the best date is, but if we send this out on October 1, let's say, everybody who we know is gonna be requesting a grant will get this package, these two forms, on October 1st, and then they have it. Now, can we meet with them ahead of time? Sure. But I'm not sure we should ask them to get the information in before a reasonable deadline for next year as the start of our cycle. Does it make any sense for us to ask them to have all this information, for example, in November? I don't think they can.
Why not? I mean, I'm just gonna play devil's advocate. If I'm running one of these groups, and I wanna know in my budgetary process that I've got that grant. I wanna know that. So I can go to my board and I can say, all right, we've got this, we've secured this.
Well, they're not gonna know it until May of the next year, but the process can begin. I just don't see what's accomplished if we tell them they have to have this form in with all the documentation in October.
Yeah, it's gonna sit there for 2 months without any action on our part.
Well, that's assuming we don't do anything. We're supposed to do something with
Well,
it.
that's, no, that I'm saying.
And say that based on the face value of this looks like something that we're going to plug into our budget and we're going to discuss and advocate to the taxpayer. I mean, wouldn't it be, look, it's already, years ago, we set the capital plan up so that we could get that thing out of the way fairly quickly, did we not? So January, we present it to people and we get their blessing that they think that that's prudent budgeting. If we got the grants out of the way, then the only thing we'd be dealing with is the thing we always deal with in terms of the nitty-gritty, which is departments and you know, things like that. I just throw it out there as I was frustrated with the process in which I felt we were under the gun to make a determination on a grant situation this last go-around. And I think we should do whatever we can to avoid that. And I also think, as I've gone on a lot, is we should have just a much tighter process on the backside.
So I would suggest, just to move things along, for a short-term goal, Jeff, if you could revise the form and have it ready for our next meeting in September.
Yes, certainly.
Or earlier, if you want to get it earlier, we can have a special meeting at some point.
Could have it, we could do it next week. What would be a reasonable earlier date? I mean, I'm agreeable to getting the information sooner.
I think if we have met with them in October, then by November, we would have that request solidified. That gives December, which everyone takes off anyway. We roll into January when we start our process of thinking about the budget, right? We do the capital plan, and then all of a sudden we hit February and we're rolling right into it. And if we knew what those grants were, we wouldn't even talk about it. We wouldn't have anyone in, we would just have it all done and sewed up. And
okay, well, that part of it's a nice outcome.
Part.
I'm just not sure that we're gonna get there as conveniently. So when would you suggest we send this out and demand that they have the form submitted with documentation?
I would say that we send it out in September, and we can hold meetings at the end of October.
That's not gonna work for the fire department.
They're not
Because,
gonna have any numbers for you.
Because everything they do, they have to go through executive committees, and then it's gotta go to the general membership
Wait a minute.
vote, so that takes.
they won't have an
a couple
idea as
months.
to what they need from the town in terms of a grant?
No, they won't know how much money they've raised in 2018.
So what you're saying is we're the offset to what they do or don't raise? Is that what the grant is for?
I mean, they're not gonna have any firm numbers. I mean, they
Won't have expenditures for 3/4 of the year?
They will, but they don't do like prorating and stuff like that, unless
Let me
things have
put it
changed a
another way.
lot
You
in
don't think the
last 5
library
years.
or the fire department can tell us in October what they spent the 100,000 on in that year?
Oh, yeah, they could.
Well, that's all,
Because they will have
that's
spent
all I'm
by
looking
then.
for.
That's what, they will have spent that, but,
Well, that's what
you know,
I'm looking
looking
for.
ahead to the next year is difficult for them
Well,
at that point.
Okay, but help me here. If the town gives the library $100,000, and in October they come to us and say, we spent the $100,000, thank you very much, next year we anticipate a $100,000 expenditure. And they say, because we spent all that $100,000 already, and we did it on this, and they were somewhat specific, it doesn't have to be granular, but somewhat specific, and we anticipate those same expenditures going forward next year. We would like to request $100,000 again. So that's in October. In November, this board says, that makes sense. Let's slot it in. No promises, because we don't, the taxpayer is the one that has to finally stamp it, but that's what we think. And then the same thing with the fire department and all the other guys down the line.
But what happens when they are coming up short and but they don't really know,
Short on what? honey?
short on income?
That's not my problem. I'm asking about what the grant covered. And if
I
they
know, but this is where they make this is how they figure it out. Like, they think, we're not getting the same kind of revenue from ambulance calls, so therefore we have to figure out where is that money coming from.
Which
They
is-
don't have the same kind of fundraisers that they've had in the past, so that's when they start figuring out, are we gonna have to ask the town for more money? That's the process that
Which
they
is
go
what,
through.
which is what I just said, is the expectation from the fire department, and is the expectation from the taxpayers, that we, the taxpayers, are going to cover any shortfall that happens in either the library, or the children's center, or the fire department. I don't think that that's good budgeting, because basically what happens is, they could knock out all of their fundraising. I'm not saying that wouldn't, that could occur, and I'm not saying that, all I'm saying, those variables, is it the expectation of the taxpayer that those variables we have to foot? And is it
I
the
just-
expectation of the fire department?
I just think you guys should be having this conversation with representatives of those groups this fall.
I agree.
That's what I'm saying. Don't have the conversation without the people in the room.
Well, you bring up the process, which I question, which I have concerns for, because I see this going like this, in terms of what the town's, and that's okay if the town says, yes, that's what we're into. But I think it's our job to know that might be coming down the pike, and how do we work it, and how do we help offset it? I agree with you wholeheartedly. I'd like to sit down with them as soon as possible. Both parties, specifically the fire department, because they're the ones where their gyrations in their budget have been most
They
severe.
want to their credit, they want to. The chief told us that he'd like to sit down and talk this fall, long before budget starts.
Okay, but talk with what goal? The goal to figure out grants.
Well, not just grants, but their situation with, specifically with equipment and with finances. They need and would like some input from the outside. And we brought that up at the budget, during the budget season last year, and mentioned it to me the other day.
And you talked about shared services.
Yes.
Well,
All right, look, to me, it would seem unfair to provide less than 60 days timing to respond to what's now a more detailed request for information. So to try to get this process going, assuming, I'll modify the form, we can have a special meeting, even if it's just you two, to approve the form, and send it out September 1 with a November 1 deadline to have everything submitted.
Okay.
with the expectation of, if the recipients are asking and have their things in by November, are we saying that we will then give them by December? That number?
Well, that's where I'm not fully following your view of the timing to say have it go earlier. But if we have the information on November 1, we can begin to evaluate it in our November
Evaluate
meeting.
it and meet with them to discuss it face to face.
I don't think that is the time to do it, because we're gonna roll right into the budget. I
When is
think
the-
that we should have, specifically with the fire department and the library, the two greater
By far.
of the grants, a sit down and saying, what do you need? Traditionally, here's where it's been. What do you need? What are your expectations in the future? And how do we help?
We can do that anytime, we can do that without forms and.
Well, the form is something that goes out to all the people, the grants, I get that, that's totally different. But I'm talking about really having an understanding as to where they're coming, so when they fill out the grant, they know where they're
So we
going.
could do what you just described next week.
We can do that right now.
Yeah.
I mean, this doesn't mean we can't meet with them.
No,
I mean,
doesn't mean you don't.
I think we should begin to evolve a more firm process for the operation of the grant system within
And
the
that's
town
what-
of Kent. So
this
that's what we're
form's-
gonna hear. You're concerned about meeting with people earlier and getting information. Well, that's something that can be done. That doesn't mean we can't do it. But at what point are we gonna put a hard deadline on getting information in? For this year, I don't see how it would be reasonable to expect information any sooner than November.
No, I think the dates you just proposed are realistic, and then at the same time, we can meet with any groups that we feel the need to meet with without any submission of forms. Just come in and we want to talk to you about your grant and the future of it and how it's.
And when the, when the form goes out on September 1st, maybe that'll be a heads up to them that maybe they should come in and start talking about it.
Contact them, make an appointment.
Okay.
If you're gonna be doing that, I think you should include any capital requests also. That's gotta be done before January.
Any new capital requests?
New updates, whatever.
Changes.
Changes to,
And we run into that every year too, where it's, you didn't have enough time to talk about it. You know what's coming, so you should be preparing for it anyway.
we could do that.
And given the fact that they have a year end, you know, they have a January 1 budgetary cycle, I think that makes total sense to do it as early as you can. Primarily because when they go to budget, they know exactly what they can put in their ledgers. So I think this is great. I think it's a good way to get them on, get that process moving.
So at another time, we'll be discussing moving up the requests for capital expenditures. But that's not part of our discussion now. Furthermore, it can't be, I guess.
That's right.
Okay, so I will revise my motion to revise the form, including the form to be sent out September 1, or the first business day in September, and request the information by November 1, or the first day in November, and that'll be rewritten up here and include a section on the form to describe in detail the need for the grant and intended use of funds, with the understanding that Barbara's page, which is more of an operational page, these two forms will be sent out to any requester.
I'll second that motion. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. All right, item number 3 on the agenda, I believe, Chris, was your request, Chemical Road. And I asked Rick to be here specifically for that, give an update. Do you have any specific questions, or do you just want to hear from Rick?
Well, we all received a letter, did we not?
We did.
And do we have that letter? I don't have it with me.
I don't have it.
But,
We received that letter. I've had numerous conversations, whether it be in person or by phone or via email, with probably 5 or 6 other residents of the road or people that travel the road on a regular basis, and have responded to all of them and tried as best I could to explain to them the delay and the condition of the road and the proposed completion of the project, which Rick can give in a little bit more detail. I'd just like to hear from
sorry to harp on procedure, but when a letter comes to you versus a letter coming to the three of us, what is the action that you?
I respond to every single letter I get.
And is it beholden on us, that all three of us got the letter, to put it into public record as to what that letter was?
If all three of us, it's written correspondence.
So that should be in the
It
minutes.
should be read into the,
Okay, so I think that that's something we should do. Just,
I've done that before, not as consistently as should be done, but,
Well, I think just of the courtesy to the taxpayer that we put that into the record.
you know.
And that's the genesis of why I asked just to talk about it, because I've traversed that road quite a bit, and it certainly is a little scary with the way it's shaped. I don't know if any of you have been on the road aside from Rick and Bruce. But,
Well, let Rick explain.
I drove up today for the first time.
what'd you think?
Let's hear from Rick.
The longest delay was waiting for the power company to move the poles. They finally did that this, maybe May, I forget the exact date. The phone company and the power company showed up one day, they moved what wires they thought they had to move. And they didn't contact the cable company to tell them they were moving it.
Happens all the time.
So, then I got a hold of the cable company, so that was another delay. Then we got into our busy time. But now we started the prep work for the blasting now. And I called today to get a firm date, and he said as soon as his excavator tells him when he can have the machine there to bring him the mats, he's gonna bring them in and start. Which will probably work out better, because now that Kenmont's closing, we'll have to use that for a detour while we're blasting. So hopefully the people won't be going over 6 or 8 sets of speed bumps over there. They'll come out as soon as the kids are gone. And then, once the blasting's done, we'll continue to fill.
When did the project start?
A year ago.
So it shut down for the winter, as is usually the
Well,
case.
Got those 2 piles where the utility poles are. They were in, this part of December. And the power company told me they were coming to put the poles in. Then the engineer got a hold of his foreman. The foreman came over and looked and decided he couldn't set 2 poles on 2 piles of dirt. And they never told me that. So I just kept waiting for him to come. And then finally, as winter was over, I called him and said, "What's up?" And he told me that he couldn't put on 2 piles of dirt. I said, "Well, unless you want to move your lines 2 or 3 times while I keep raising the road up, you're going to have to put them on 2 piles of dirt, because I don't have room under the wires to work." So they finally agreed to put the 2 poles in. Now we can fill, where the poles are is a finished grade. So that section's got to be filled that much more there. But there are 3 areas where there's blasting to be done, and we'll do those and use that rock for fill also.
And all the mountains of, not all, but most of the mountains of fill that you see at the town garages are slated for landfill.
So what's the target completion date?
I think it's before winter, another month, nothing happening. I don't have guy rail lined up yet, because I didn't
Well, a month
know
and a half,
any dates or anything, so.
month and a half brings it basically to the end of September? Beginning of October?
Yeah, we'll probably be in there, I would assume a week blasting, if we don't run into any problems.
So once the blasting is done, it should move along fairly,
Once the blasting's done, it's just fill,
trucking and spreading and trucking and
Yeah.
spreading and rolling.
everything's filled besides those 2 spots.
It sounds like you're the project manager.
Yep. Yeah, we've been doing most of the trucking, the stuff that we've been buying from Canaan for fill. Allendale's been trucking, but any of the fill on the edges and stuff like that, we've basically been trucking. We did have Bosiak, all that fill that was left from the Carter Road Bridge. We paid him to bring all that up there.
So like I said, I've had numerous conversations with road residents and giving them, for the most part, what Rick just said. Sympathize, I mean, yeah, I get it, it's rough, scary looking. We were gonna put some Jersey barriers up for safety's sake in the winter, but the way it ended up being left with pretty substantial piles on either side of the road sort of made that not necessary. Pretty steep pitch, the finished product's not gonna be that steep.
Is it presently a hazard?
I don't mind so.
Will it be a hazard in the winter?
There's gonna be guide rail there, but it was a hazard before. I had trucks going down over the bank backwards all the time. so.
Oh, no, I know, but that was one of the questions that was brought up, a point that was made, that it was hazardous. And so I just, from a town's point of view, we don't want to create that kind of situation.
And to Rick's credit, we had some heavy rain and there were some washouts and somebody called and complained. He had some guys go up and take care of it. And we actually got a thank you from one of the people that complained, because now it's fine, so.
Well,
Nancy's, the email that you got said a lot of other stuff on that road too, which is not part of that project.
I understand that.
And the project only goes right to the top of the hills, so if I have extra money left, then out of that project money, we can extend the paving. And this, I don't know if you've seen this before, this is a letter from that section past the corner there.
Right.
I don't know if you saw the pond.
Mm-hmm.
That's state property, the road was put in without a permit.
Yep.
By the developers.
Yes, it was.
And we got asked to start maintaining it. So, and that's part of that email too, is maintenance on that part of it, so.
Well, I think that's
If that needs
I think that's
paving, then that's.
a separate issue. I think the issue is, at least that I got from the letter, was the specific operations of what's happening on the road itself. The only reason I asked if it's a hazard, then maybe what you do is you actually detour it and reroute it until you finish. But that's your call, is it whether it's a hazard or not, I don't know.
Well, we've done until now, last year when we were working on it, was if we had to close it during the day, we would. Otherwise, people can't get around.
Okay.
They might have to wait for the roller to just pack it down a little bit, and then have it open every night.
Well, it sounded like a lot of the delays were communication issues between the various utility companies and putting in poles. I mean, is all that, just the bottom line, is all that over with? The poles are gonna be installed when they need to be, where they need to be?
They're there now, yeah. I finally got all the lines moved. The cable company came, I might have to raise up a little more. I asked them to go as high as they could, and they didn't. There's a certain distance they have to be down from the power lines, which is the minimum they can be is 40 inches, and they're definitely a lot more than that. So if I do have a problem with the pipe on any of them, we'll just have to come back and raise them up.
And we met, as another example, the property owner right on the corner had some important and serious questions, and so Rick and I arranged a meeting to meet with he and the engineer here at this table, and we talked about and answered his questions, and he left satisfied. Not happy, but satisfied with the information that he got.
It sounds like there might be some more potential for unanticipated delays. I mean, if you do have to move wires again, what kind of response time do you get from utility companies? Could they all of a sudden interject another 2 or 3 weeks?
Probably a week.
They are very difficult. They don't talk to
If
us.
it's just moving the height of the wire, it's only the telephone or cable, it's not the power line, so it's those.
And I'm just as an example, sort of related, I'm just trying to get them to move one pole on the corner by the former Petco. Just move one pole, and they can't move it because there's some wires that still have to be moved off the old pole onto the new pole. There were 10 people down meeting on that corner last Friday, I think it was, discussing those wires. They don't communicate with one another.
I get the Sharon newsletter from the selectmen, or from the town, and what I find very informative there, driving around a lot of those roads, is one of the things they have is a what's happening on what road and where. So as an example, they said, we'll be chip sealing Niblo Hill, and we'll be doing this, this, and this, and so residents be aware. So in terms of managing expectations for people, I think it might be something that you can incorporate in your newsletter as a standard as to, this is the road we're working on and this is the progress. This is the next road we're gonna handle, and this is whatever. So it could be from the highway department, this, this, and this. Because I think that when you manage.
That's a really good idea.
When you manage that
Highway-
expectation.
Just a highway department update.
Easy to do.
Yeah, and that way, then,
We're
any of
not
those
talking every
questions you
single
get,
day, it's easy to do.
yeah, that I think would be helpful, and then it would explain that there's a delay with CLMP, or, you know, we expect
And I
here.
don't know, how well versed have you guys become in Everbridge yet?
We're,
Working on it?
we're working on it.
Because that does have the capabilities to do what you just described, to circle an area of town.
Right, yeah.
And these are the roads that are gonna be oiled, and all the people, at least who have signed up, can be warned via that.
Well, you have a good mailing list, so I think that's.
No, I've done that, you know, I let people know when chip sealing was coming, but
Right.
yeah, I can do that.
Yeah, but as long as they know on a consistent basis.
Yeah, and
then-
even project ahead, you know, if something's gonna happen in October.
Yeah,
You know, it's-
yeah, simple to do.
Thank you, Rick.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Rick. Okay, the last item on the agenda is the management review. It has begun. Just three quick things from me. I did meet with Lee Palmer here for a few hours just to get things started. He then, at that same day, he hadn't planned on it, but he had planned to stay for the better part of the day. And he wondered if there were any employees who would be interested in being interviewed, because he's going to interview all of them. And so there were two who said, sure, they would. So he did interview 2 employees already. There is a sign-up list, which is fairly complete right now, in which he's going to be interviewing most of the other employees on the 20th of August. He'll be here all day. And the interviews take anywhere from 10 minutes to a half an hour, which will vary person to person, office to office. So that's been done that's what's happened so far.
So, is he planning to interview you and the 2 of us as well?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yep, and I did send you questionnaires
Yeah,
to
I
fill out,
haven't done
and I
that.
filled mine out and sent it in. Get in the questionnaire, so he has that before interviews.
Sign up sheets on the
The
desk.
sign-up sheet is on Joyce's desk,
Ooh,
if
okay.
you want to go ahead and sign up on the 20th.
So he's been officially on the project since July 1. We're supposed to
He's
get,
been
we're supposed to be getting periodic
We'll
updates.
get one shortly. He has been given all the information that he's asked for. He's asked for job descriptions, he's asked for policy and procedure manual for both elected officials and non-elected officials. He's asked for the union contract just to have. Everything he's asked for, he has gotten.
Okay, I would have expected a status report before now. I mean, the status report can be what you just gave, but I thought it was his obligation to send us a written status report, not, a time-consuming
I can't remember
20-page
how often
document,
he
just
did.
that.
I can reach out to him tomorrow and ask him for
I
something.
think you should.
To Jeff's point, it's more than, when you reach out, say, the expectation is every meeting, we want an update.
Is that what we
That's
decided?
Well, I'm not sure it was tied to meetings, I was thinking 1 or 2 a month, a status report, and then a regular report,
Yeah.
indicating some nature of, his insights so far, where he's headed. But a status report, just saying I interviewed, so many people, the questionnaire has been sent out to me, that's a status report. So we know he's at least working on the project. And if he meets with you and reports to you, that's great, but the deal was he reports to the select.
For sure. Anything else on that?
No.
Topic? Okay, in that case, a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So Jeff, these are discard
You're ready to get back?
Yes.
Oh, I'm fine, thanks.
previous